class, in this video we are starting our discussion of conformity. And so the first thing I want you to do is to watch this short video.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
So why did that guy conform? Why was he going along with everyone else? That is what we're basically going to cover for this entire chapter. And so what I want to do first is talk about some research connected with this. The first one is Schachter's experiment. And what Schachter did was he had male students who would read a teen's case history after he was arrested and decide what sort of punishment he should get. And so that punishment would go anywhere from very lenient to very harsh. And this was decided in a group. Within the group, there were 9 participants, but 3 were really Confederates, fake participants. One of the Confederates took the modal role, one took the deviant role, and one took the slider role. If it was the modal Confederate, then that person conformed to the average position of the group. The deviant Confederate took a dramatically different opinion than the general consensus of the group. And then the slider went from deviant to modal. So started out disagreeing and then agreeing. So my question for you, who was the least liked out of these 3 participants? And so it's the deviant. The deviant was the one who the actual participants hated the most. He was usually ignored as soon as it became evident he wasn't going to change his view. Basically, what are the general idea of nonconformists being popular? Like, it's good to not go along with the crowd. That's not actually the way it works. We don't like people who don't go along with the group. We like people who conform. Krugalinsky and Webster did research on this, looking at nonconformists, and found that they were especially disliked when it became obvious they weren't going to conform towards the end of a discussion, towards the deadline. So basically the opposite of the slider in Schachter's experiment. When it was someone who didn't make it clear that they weren't going to go along with the group until the very end, that was the most hated individual. So why does this conformity exist? There is sort of an evolutionary benefit to it. For example, the first hunters, if they were all in a group hunting together and someone took off running in the opposite direction, if you just did what that person did, conformed and took off running, you were more likely to survive. The person that was like, I wonder if they heard something, I'm not going to move until I hear it too, is the one that died in the stampede. So if you conform to the group, there is some benefit to it. Although there's definitely some problems with conforming as well. For example, Hitler is a great example of conformity being horrible. Hitler's inner circle did not allow for deviation, did not allow for nonconformists. You had to go along with his most barbaric activities if you wanted to stay in that inner circle, if you wanted to stay alive. And these horrible activities can seem reasonable if no one is saying, oh my goodness, why would we do this? So Hitler is an example, the 86 Challenger explosion. So that was a NASA space shuttle that blew up on takeoff, and they knew that there was a problem with the O-rings, that they might have issues, not be as stable with the temperature change, or with the temperature. If it was too cold at liftoff, it was cold that day. They were like, oh, no, we're going to keep going for it. Nonconformity was not allowed. And then it led to the explosion. Same thing with the Columbia explosion. This was a NASA space shuttle that exploded on re-entry because of cracks in the heat shield. And similarly, they knew about this problem, that this could potentially lead to an explosion, but potentially not. And descent nonconformity was not allowed. They still went along with that re-entry. They didn't try to fix the problem in space, and the spaceship exploded. Watergate, another example. No one was telling Nixon, hey, maybe we shouldn't be breaking into the DNC headquarters in the Watergate Hotel. Maybe this is not a smart idea, and so it led to the end of his presidency. You could also, well, actually, before I give you any more, that's enough examples. One question I have for you, what is an example that you can think of for a time when conformity led to really negative consequences for somebody? Okay, let's keep going. For a lot of those examples, especially the NASA examples, this can be connected with groupthink. So Irving Janis created the idea of groupthink. And this is a way of thinking that occurs in cohesive groups in which the members' need for agreement overrides their ability to realistically assess a course of action and its alternatives. Basically, groups perceive themselves as invulnerable, and instead of really discussing an issue, they quickly coalesce around an idea, and that is their consensus. They are not going to change. Nonconformity is really discouraged. So when we talk about conformity, is a change in a person's behavior or opinions as a result of real or imagined pressure from another person or group. Conformity starts early in life. Babies pay more attention to people who mirror their facial expressions. This is the chameleon effect. It's when you mirror another person's nonverbal behaviors and mannerisms. So you kind of, oftentimes it's unconscious, but you copy the mannerisms, the facial expression, the movements of somebody else. And Chartrand and Barsh did a few examples of this, a few experiments. In the first version, they had a Confederate who was talking with a participant, and the Confederate either touched their face or shook their foot at regular points in the discussion. And the participant who was talking with that Confederate did that behavior significantly more than a participant in the control group whose Confederate was not touching their face or shaking their foot. In another version, the Confederate mirrored mannerisms of the participant. So whatever behaviors the participant was doing, the Confederate would subtly mirror them. And in that version of the experiment, the participants were asked at the end to rate how much they liked the person they were speaking with, the Confederate. And the Confederates who used that chameleon effect, who were copying the participant, were rated higher than Confederates who were talking with someone in the control group who were not using the chameleon effect. One part of what is going on with this chameleon effect is mirror neurons. These are highly specialized brain cells that are activated both when we perform an action and when we watch someone else perform the same action. It's what makes humans great imitators. It doesn't activate, though, when we are watching someone we don't like, or when we're watching someone who has a lower status or less power than we have. So we only use the mirror neurons. Our mirror neurons are only activated when we are observing the behavior of someone we like or someone who is of equal or higher status than us. And so a related concept is ideomotor action. This is merely thinking about a behavior makes performing it more likely. You're also activating these mirror neurons. So if it's in your mind, you're more likely to do it. What is a good example of ideomotor action? A good example of this is Ouija boards. So when people are using Ouija boards and they spell out a word, it's because they were even unconsciously thinking about that word. And so because they're thinking about it, it's more likely their hands are going to move to those letters. And then the final related concept with this is social learning. This is when you learn by observing other people. We're going to talk about social learning in several chapters, but it's your mirror neurons that are activated when you're watching someone, and it's basically as if you're doing it. It helps you learn to do the behavior as well. And the ability to use social learning starts fairly young. For example, in Han's experiment, toddlers were taught to throw a ball through one of 3 holes in a board. So it's like the middle hole. If you throw it through this middle hole, then you get a treat. I think it was chocolate. And so they learned this on their own. Then they were put into a group with other toddlers who had been taught that they got a prize for throwing that ball through a different hole in the board, like the first hole. And so these new toddlers that were brought in, the ones who had been taught, you get chocolate if you use the middle hole for throwing the ball, they still got chocolate for using that middle hole when they threw the ball. However, because all the other kids around them were getting the treat for the first hole, even though it meant they got nothing, they started using that first hole to throw their ball through, and again, did not get any treat for it. This is something that is uniquely human, this learning from others, even if it can potentially be detrimental to us. They lost their chocolate. When they recreated this experiment with chimps and with orangutans, they didn't conform. They stuck with the behavior that was going to get them the chocolate. They didn't care what the other animals around them were doing. So for this social influence, this conformity, it can be very subtle. It's oftentimes not very obvious social pressure that gets you to conform. A good example of this is laugh tracks on sitcoms. Probably when you're watching it aren't even really thinking about this fake laughing in the background, but the reason that sitcoms will use a laugh track if they don't have a live studio audience is because it works. Hearing someone laugh, even if it's a fake laugh track, is going to get you to be more likely to laugh yourself. You are conforming to the laughter of other people. An example of this conforming to what people around you are doing, especially when it comes to TV, was the Reagan and Mondale debate that took place in 1984. And this study was done by Fine in 2007. And what he did was he had people watch this presidential debate one of three ways. Why this debate between Reagan and Mondale was so famous is because in this presidential campaign, a big factor in it was the age of the candidates. At this time, Reagan was considered very old. He was running for re-election. He was 73. He was already the oldest president we'd ever had. And Mondale was significantly younger. And so a lot of people were asking, was Reagan too old to be president? And in this debate, Reagan joked, I will not make age an issue in this campaign. I'm not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. And it got huge laughter and applause in the debate, and Reagan went on to win re-election. We did not have a President Walter Mondale. And so the participants in this experiment saw the debate in one of three ways. A third of them saw it just as is. A third of them saw it without the joke, so that joke was removed from the video. And then a third of them saw the whole debate, but the audience response, the laughter and applause during the joke, was taken out. And so my question for you, in which of those scenarios, choose all that apply, in which of those scenarios did people think that Reagan won the debate? Okay, so the way this worked out, as is, people thought that Reagan won the debate hands down. If they saw it without the joke, they thought that Mondale really won the debate. It was the highest option out of these three. Mondale blew Reagan out of the water. If they saw the whole debate without the audience response to the joke, so they heard that joke, but they didn't hear the laughter, they still thought that Mondale won. So the only factor in this experiment that got people to think that Reagan won this debate, like people back in 1984 did, was if they heard the audience laugh for that joke. They could hear the joke and still think Mondale won, but if they heard the audience laugh at the joke, then it reversed to Reagan winning. So these are social cues in your environment that tell us what you should think, how you should feel, what you should do. For Sharif's famous experiment connected with this, it was an experiment using the autokinetic effect. The autokinetic effect is the fact that lights in the distance look like they're moving. An example of this is stars twinkling. So when it looks like stars are twinkling, that's the autokinetic effect. Because the light is so far away, it appears as if it's slightly moving. We register that as twinkling stars. So in this experiment, Sharif asked people how far the light in the distance was moving. how big of a change it had. And they would be asked this individually, and the participants would settle somewhere between 2 to 6 inches. Then they would have to do the same thing. How far is the light moving? But in the group, they'd have to give their response out loud. So it wasn't just private. They'd have to say their response in front of the group. Basically, what happened was everyone's answers came towards the center. Everyone, the people who were guessing privately higher, like 6 inches, moved down to like 4. The people who were guessing closer to 2 moved up again to about 4. So they all sort of coalesced around an average. And the really interesting part is after that, they went back to doing it privately, guessing the distances privately, and they stayed nearer to the average. The people who had originally been saying 6 inches didn't go all the way back to 6. The people who were originally closer to 2 didn't go back there. They all stayed towards that average they had conformed to. The next experiment, well, actually before I show you that, what I'm going to do. The next experiment is Asch, Solomon Asch's study. And what I'm going to do is show you a video. Well, oh no, you know what? Before I do that, I'm not going to show you a video yet. I'm going to ask you some questions about it. I'm going to explain the study, ask you some questions about it, and then I'll show you a recreation of it so you can see sort of how it looks on its own. So for Asch's study, what happened was there were 7 participants. 6 of them were really Confederates, only 1 was a real participant. And they were sitting around a table. The real participant would be like number 6 in the circle. And they were told that they were doing a perceptual study. And they would be shown a line. And then they would be shown 3 comparison lines. And asked, which of these 3 comparison lines matches the original line? And this is not tricky. Like, it's obviously this one right here. And so there'd be 12 rounds of this. And the first couple of times, everyone would give the correct answer. And then after a couple of times, the Confederates would start all giving the same wrong answer. So the first person would say, oh, it's this line right here. And the next person, this line, this line, this line. And you get to the real participant. So my question for you is a couple of questions. What percentage of the time did the real participant give a knowingly wrong answer? What percentage of participants gave a wrong answer at least once? And what percentage of the participants gave a wrong answer every single time? Okay, so let's break this down. For Asch's experiment, 6 Confederates, only 1 real participant, 35% of the time the participants gave a wrong answer. Over 3/4, 76.8% of the time, they gave a wrong, not of the time, 76.8% of the participants gave a wrong answer at least once. And 5% gave a wrong answer every single time the Confederates gave a wrong answer as well. So this is the famous Asch line experiment on conformity. And so what I want to do now is show you that recreation. So watch that video now.
Just how far will people go to please the crowd? As you'll see tonight, much farther than you'd ever think. Here's Dawn Fratangelo.
When it's least expected, you're elected, you're the star today. Smile, you're on Candid Camera.
This man finds himself in a strange predicament. So does this man. He's in an elevator facing front, but inexplicably, everyone else is facing the back. It's the dilemma presented by TV's Candid Camera 35 years ago, pitting individuality against the pull of group pressure.
He's very unhappy. You'll see him. He doesn't know whether to go inside and face front or outside and face back. Here's a fella with his hat on.
Over and over, the unsuspecting TV stars all reacted the same way, like sheep.
A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions.
Although it was just for laughs, Candid Camera also raised serious questions about conformity for all of us. Would you be strong enough to stand up for yourself if you're a minority of one?
How powerful is the pull of negative group pressure? We wanted to know. So Dateline enlisted Professor Pretcanis and his psychology students at the University of California, Santa Cruz to replicate Dr. Solomon Asch's classic 1950s conformity study. They did what Asch did, design a simple exercise matching the line on the left with the one of identical length on the right, and then have the students who were plants give intentionally wrong answers, claiming, for example, line 1 on this card is the right match.
1.
1.
1.
1.
1.
The subjects, always in seat 6, are then faced with the experiment's fundamental question: conform by giving answers they know to be absurdly wrong, or defy the group and give answers they know to be correct.
Go ahead.
And there was one more part of the experiment, designed to draw the subjects in and make the exercise more convincing.
2.
Initially, the plants actually give the correct answers.
2.
2.
2.
2.
At least the first few times.
We have consensus.
But as the rounds continue and the plants do give those wrong answers, try playing along. Watch these subjects, who were told they were part of a visual perception experiment, respond to the mounting pressure of the group solidarity. And ask yourself, what would you do? We'll start with Marie. As she hears the clearly wrong answers,
1.
1.
she glances at the leader, seemingly for help. Yet, she sticks to her guns and defies the group.
3.
And keeps disagreeing.
3. 3.
3.
Although her resistance is never easy.
1.
As Marie stares intently at this card, she can't believe her ears.
1.
1. 1.
The urge to join the group and conform builds with each wrong answer, and she suffers for every right answer she gives.
2.
What does she finally do?
3.
3.
3.
2.
She would not conform.
There was a lot of pressure in that room. There was a lot of tension that I felt. I can see where somebody would buckle and just lose it.
And you didn't like being different?
No, but I didn't want to be wrong either.
Up next, Brian. What will he do?
1.
1.
The first few times the plants pick the obviously incorrect line, Brian confidently defies the group.
1. 3.
Confident because just look at the card. Of course, the only logical answer is 3. And this card, nobody could possibly say anything but 3 is the correct answer here as well, right? Just watch.
2.
Notice Brian's eyes start to droop, and listen to his voice get softer
3.
when the group gets it wrong again and again.
3.
3. 2.
For 4 rounds now, he's been fighting the good fight against conformity.
3.
3.
But with the pressure mounting,
3.
3. 3.
He just can't fight anymore.
3.
And in succeeding rounds with Brian continuing to give answers he knows to be wrong,
2. 2.
he only gets sadder and softer.
3.
By the final trial, he's a thoroughly beaten man.
1.
I gave up.
1.
There were times when I didn't even look at the lines and said the answer. I became quiet, decided that I wasn't playing the game right, so I just played along.
One of the participants in our demonstration was a bit different. This man, George, older and an artist.
Basically, I consider myself to be a nonconformist.
And one of the student plants sized him up exactly that way.
I felt he would take one look at us and say, bunch of kids, and then go his own way.
Would he?
2.
2.
2. 3.
He holds out for 2 rounds. But what happens on the very next round?
3.
3.
3.
3. 3.
A total reversal. And what about the next round?
3.
3. 3.
George, it so happens, not only goes along, he dives in head first.
1.
He gives wrong answers with an air of total certainty.
3.
I didn't want to be different anymore. The pressure got to me, and I caved in.
3. 3.
Even though I knew it wasn't the truth, it made me feel more comfortable.
In the conformity test you just saw, nearly 60% of the subjects, 9 of 16, succumbed to the group pressure.
Okay, so let me go over some more recent experiments connected with this, and that will be it for this video. For the first one, Bond and Smith, they analyzed 133 experiments in 13 countries and found collectivist countries had a higher rate of conformity than individualistic ones. So you see higher conformity in collectivistic cultures, ones where relying on the group and thinking about the group matters more than individualistic ones. Bernst's research group found that when they did a line study and put people in an fMRI while they did it, they found that if someone didn't conform, the nonconformists, the deviants, had higher activity in their amygdala, which is in the emotion area, especially strong emotions like fear. That part was more active when they weren't conforming. And Janus, who again created groupthink, found that there were usually people who enforced conformity or consensus. Janus called these mind guards, but a mind guard is not essential. For example, in Ash's line experiment, there was no one who was trying to force conformity, but the participants still basically did it. And so we will, actually, I'm going to stop there for this video. We'll start in on motives for conformity in the next video.